Thank you all so much for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. We're pleased to bring you this webinar introducing our new CertiDeath Paragon product. My name is Jack Hartwig. I'm the marketing manager here at the Berwyn Group. Today's speakers, we have John Bikes, president here at the Berwyn Group, as well as Dan Urson, our chief information officer. They're going to be talking a little bit about the history of CertiDeath and how Paragon came to be, and then talking about Paragon itself, as well as the cybersecurity measures that it addresses. So John, I will pass things over to you to get us started.
Great, thanks Jack, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us to talk about what we consider to be a revolutionary product in CertiDeath Paragon. Before we jump into Paragon or even CertiDeath, I just want to level set on the Berwyn Group. The Berwyn Group is a sister company of PBI, and I know that over the past couple of years have been a number of changes and maybe some confusion, but to set the record straight, the Berwyn Group is a sister company of PBI. I've been with the organization for the last 7 years. The Berwyn Group is the largest independent company dedicated to population management, which includes both CertiDeath, CertiCensus, and other death audit and locate products. We have over 100 people dedicated to this organization. We have over 2,000 customers that are using our services, and obviously have been in business for a number of years. So I just want to make it clear that PBI and Berwyn are sister companies. As we move forward, you'll be hearing a lot more about the Berwyn brand. That's where we will be investing in our technology, in our people, in our continuous innovation and upgrades, which many of you have seen. Obviously continuing to honor and service any PBI contracts, but just so everyone understands the strategy that they're sister companies. Moving forward, we are investing in the Berwyn Group as a brand. However, CertiCensus and CertiDeath are currently offered through both companies. Again, as we move forward, that could change with regard to innovation, but I just want to level set that. So with that said, let's talk about death audit specifically. As many people on this webinar are likely aware, there's a challenge to finding decedents now. The death master file used to be the primary source, covered 95% of all deaths. You needed one variable or characteristic, which is a social security number. And so it was very simple to do. And by the way, you could buy that database. Almost anyone could buy it for a very cheap price. I helped start a company called legacy.com previously. We purchased that database. It was a few $100s a month. There weren't a lot of security requirements. That's obviously changed over the last 10 years or so for various reasons. But the death master file that's now available to companies like ours, as well as many of the companies that are on this webinar, doesn't cover 95% of all deaths any longer. It's now down to 16% of all deaths. So it's important to understand that there's been a significant degradation there. What does that mean? It means that you have to find other sources in order to identify decedents. And those other sources are primarily obituaries. So again, one of the differentiators between Berwyn and other companies out there, and there are very few of them out there that are significant in size or scope, Berwyn actually uses its own technology to go aggregate data from 26,000 different websites, including funeral home and media websites every day. We don't buy our obituaries from anybody else. We aggregate our own data sets, and we combine that obviously with the limited access death master file along with state records. And so big differentiation for Berwyn in that we're not reliant on any third party for our obituaries. So as this has become more difficult, we saw this start to occur in the mid 2015, 2016 area. And so the first thing that we did was we introduced a new product that was what I'll call evolutionary in its change. And that new product was CertiDeath. And the reason that we introduced CertiDeath was because of the degradation of the death master file. We saw it becoming very difficult for organizations to dedicate the resources needed in order to identify decedents. That doesn't mean the people trying to do this or the organizations trying to do this didn't know what they were doing or were bad at it necessarily. It just meant that this has become really, really hard, and you have to really focus on this to get it right. And the way that we figured that out was when we started getting files in from our customers, as the death master file degraded, we could see that customers were missing deaths because we would start to run it through the process we were developing and could pick out decedents that were being missed. And so we created CertiDeath to eliminate that problem. The goal with CertiDeath, which has become the gold standard of death audit, it's utilized by over 1,000 companies now, and when it was introduced a short 5 years ago, it's saved hundreds of millions of dollars in overpayments, as well as enabled release reserves to that same extent on the insurance side. So we introduced CertiDeath because we saw how difficult it was becoming to identify decedents. We were able to put together our own data sets, combine that with algorithms, and a number of companies out there will run algorithms, many of which, by the way, are antiquated, haven't been kept up to date, haven't been adjusted for learning. We run machine learning algorithms, but most importantly, we combine that with human expertise. That's something that totally differentiates Berwyn. A lot of companies are running algorithms and will claim to have a certain level of coverage as a result. We have direct experience and can show data that indicates if you're running algorithms, you're not capturing all the deaths. Why is that? Well, the majority of deaths now are identified through obituaries. Obituaries are an unstructured data source. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to create algorithms that cover every variation of an obituary. And so what happens is you can run algorithms and you can match on certain characteristics, and however someone scores them, you can get scores that at or above, you can be very confident that that person is deceased. A lot of people do that. You can get scores that at a certain level or below, you're very confident that's not a match because it matches on a first name like John. Okay, that's not the match, didn't match on a bunch of other characteristics. You get a bunch of matches or potential matches in this mid-tier of we've got some characteristics that match, but not enough that give us confidence this person is deceased. What will often happen in every case, except for CertiDeath, is that data gets kicked back to the customer for them to try to figure out or add more data to try to figure out if that person is deceased. That's the Berwyn difference and the CertiDeath difference. We actually take those potential matches where they're not high enough or low enough, and we kick them into our human experts to review. What does that mean? Human experts reviewing sounds like, okay, John, they just read the obituary. That's not the case. They're actually triangulating into other data sources to add additional information. So we're looking at relative databases. We're looking at address databases. We're looking at other data sources to pick up pieces that might be able to triangulate into information that's in the obituary or other data set pieces that the customer has sent us. As a result of that, we're able to cover about 97% of all deaths. No one can cover 100% of deaths because typically there's not good enough data coming from a customer. Not everyone has an obituary. We know there are false positives in the DMF, so no one can ever say 100%. We're about as close as you can get because of this human element. And how do we know the human element adds value? Well, last year, we validated 1 million deaths. Validated. Doesn't mean potential matches here. Customer, please go figure these out for yourselves. We validated 1 million deaths. Approximately 3 million people die every year in the US. So that's about a third of all deaths were validated through us. We are running about 60 million records through CertiDeath. So think of the fact that we're running about a sixth of the US population through CertiDeath, but identify about a third of the deaths. That shows you kind of how old our populations are, which makes sense since we typically cover pensions and insurance plans. So of those 1 million deaths that we validated last year, 167,000 required human intervention. And that's typically what we see. Between 15 and 20% of all the deaths that we identify come from human experts actually taking a look at data to validate it. We've actually, in proof of concept, whether it's via potential competitors or internal processes, CertiDeath has always outperformed, has never lost what I call the Coke or Pepsi challenge, never, right? And again, it's because we have this human component of well-trained individuals and extensive processes to identify decedents. So again, evolutionary, right? We created CertiDeath to address a problem we saw happening with decedent identification across multiple industries. It's been a runaway success as a product. It's become the gold standard for death audit. There is nothing that competes with it in terms of coverage, accuracy, which is 99.98%. So again, if you're running only algorithms, you're going to get a bunch of false positives potentially. Our accuracy rate, because of human intervention, is 99.98%, and timeliness. Typically within 5 to 9 days of a death, we can turn around and say this person is deceased. So the gold standard in death audit has been developed, widely accepted, proven over and over. Again, we evaluate our business not based on stats like, hey, our coverage is 98%, or we have this many sources. That's great. Anyone can say all that stuff. It's about measurable outcomes. How do we perform? And again, based on the number of customers we have, that continues to grow, based on the fact that we have never lost a head-to-head challenge with any competitor, internal, external. Those are the measurable outcomes that we have. And by the way, at the end of the day, the important part to your business is saving billions, millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars in overpayments, allowing release reserves, getting the right data for mortality assumptions, etc. Right? So we created that 5 years ago. Now, we are in the business of constant innovation in this category. Again, the largest independent company dedicated to this category of population management. We are constantly innovating, whether it's behind the scenes with our processes and data sources, or out in the open with something like Paragon, right? And so as we looked at what we've done with CertiDeath, we took a closer look at what the biggest impediment or challenge in this category is, not only for us, but for our customers to work with us or any outside vendor. And what is that challenge? That challenge is data security, right? It's protecting sensitive PII, in particular, social security numbers. And so as we step back and said, we have the best death audit solution in the marketplace in terms of measurable outcomes and identifying decedents, how do we make it so that we can completely eliminate most of the data security risk associated with this category? And that's what Paragon is, which I'll talk about after we talk about the data security that we've actually put around our infrastructure.
Thanks, John, for that introduction. Privacy, security questions are top of mind for all of our customers. So I'm Dan Urson, I'm our Chief Information Officer. I oversee our engineering teams, our data science groups, the governance, risk, and compliance teams that are reviewing contracts and customer security questions. So this is the kind of stuff that I live and breathe every day. And so I wanted to share a bit with you about some of the common questions that we see, industry trends, and how you can feel really good about the CertiDeath product that John just walked through. So what I'd like to do today is bring you on a journey of, I guess, a typical customer journey, moving their data through our process, how they can feel good about transferring that data before contracting, during onboarding, while we're doing the processing, and ultimately our data retention policies and cleanup. So before a file is even uploaded to our process, we take great pains to work with you and your compliance teams to make sure that you understand the certifications and compliance that we're undergoing. So a SOC 2 Type 2 report is focused on an annual review of our operating controls. So we go through a very detailed annual review there on all the different certifications and security practices we have in place. Fundamentally, our security practices are based on the NIST standards from the government, National Institute of Standards and Technology. We offer a profile for customers that are interested in onboarding with our published SOC 2 reports, data retention policies. You can see the reports of our annual penetration tests. You can see data flow and network diagrams. These are the kind of things that sophisticated companies want to have documented in a formal way. And that's something we provide before we even begin negotiating a file upload. When it's time for you to finally onboard with the process and start to transfer data to us, there are two main ways that happens. Many of our customers that prefer to do things through a web portal, they can log on to our web portal securely, or they can utilize automation through a secure file transfer protocol. For those users that would like to take advantage of our web portal, let's just get right to it. Multi-factor authentication is one of the most important baseline protections you can have on a web portal today. What that means is if someone were to breach your password, we read about these things all the time in news events, that's not enough to breach your account. They also have to have access to a device, an IP address, some other feature about your identity. And so we enable that by default, have had for quite a while for all of our customers. In addition to that, many service providers will charge additionally for single sign-on. So single sign-on is where, rather than create another username and password with yet another website, we're able to use your organization's identity provider so that when an an employee ultimately leaves your organization, they immediately lose access to a vendor like ourselves. So single sign-on is something that we set up for you in a matter of hours. It's a no additional cost. Security is part of the service offering we provide, and of course, there's no additional cost for that. I spoke a moment ago about the two main options of uploading data. We spoke a moment ago about the web portal. The web portal, of course, is available 24/7. You can upload your file there. You can review population. You can run various reports. As soon as a report is available to you, you can access that information. Organizations that prefer to leverage automation really enjoy our SFTP options. So SFTP is Secure File Transfer Protocol. That's a way for machine-to-machine communication. You may decide that on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, you'd like to send us an updated population file. You could choose to replace your existing file entirely. You can add updates to us, simply add or remove, so you're not transferring the entire data set over the wire. These are things that we support. And a few notes that I wanted to mention about this. Our Secure File Transfer Protocol, we've set up a very strict set of security protocols around that. It actually accepts only one directional traffic. You might imagine like going to a bank Dropbox. From the outside of the bank, you can drop your check in, but there's no way for anyone else to access it. Only behind the scenes in the secure area of the bank can they obtain that. And then similarly, when we deliver your results, that traffic is one direction as well. So there's absolutely no possibility of data that was dropped in being pulled out. The egress policies simply don't allow that. That's something we take a lot of pride in. For those of you keeping score with different NIST recommendations, there was a mention there about TLS 1.2. TLS 1.2 is the current NIST recommendation for network traffic over HTTPS, which is what web portals operate on. TLS 1.3, of course, is supported today, and over time, as NIST makes that their standard, we will adopt that as our minimum requirement as well. So you've gone ahead and you've gotten through you've reviewed all of our security documentation, you've uploaded your first file, and now you might wonder, well, what happens to it? So the very first thing that happens while we're staging and preparing your file for matching, we have already applied an additional layer of encryption on top of your file that you may not have even provided. So we wrap your file in an additional layer of PGP encryption while that file is being staged and ready to be ingested into our system. Many organizations will talk about that second level there, storage level at rest, AES 256 encryption. That's of course the industry standard. That's data at rest in a hard drive on a server somewhere, and of course we have that. Everyone these days supports storage encryption at rest, but the additional level of file storage encryption is essential because oftentimes with the trends we're seeing in cybersecurity, it's less common for someone to get direct access to a hard drive, to a server. It's logical access breaches that we see being a problem. So this additional level of file encryption is something that protects the file, even in the event that someone had accessed that file, it's in an encrypted state and is unusable to an attacker. That's something we're very excited about, and you won't see with other providers. Now, once we've staged your file, we're preparing to review it. As part of the onboarding with you, we will have set up an import profile. What that means is every organization's data looks different. Every organization's data transfer practices are different. You might have some fields another organization doesn't. We don't enforce a particular file upload standard. If you have 6 fields that you find valuable and that's what you can provide in a comprehensive way, we'll set up a profile for you in the format, CSV, Excel, fixed width, whatever column order you want. We can create this profile for you on onboarding. This is beneficial for a few reasons. First of all, when we know the profile of your data, we can handle this onboarding in automated fashion. That means our technical staff is not dealing with your files directly. There's no risk of it being downloaded to a computer that could be left unprotected. This is happening in a secure environment without a human intervention. Second, by us knowing the fields that you're going to send over to us, we're able to identify if you've overshared data. We want to make sure we're providing the service to you with the minimum amount of information necessary to keep your risk profile down. So if you've overshared, we can identify that and communicate that back with you, delete the file right away and ask you to submit something else. Similarly, if you forget to send a field, we can warn you about that so that we don't degrade the performance of your results and make sure you're always getting the maximum value out of your death audit. I mentioned the automated processing. This allows us to get data out of the file form that you've provided to us into our secure environment, and then the file is completely purged as soon as the staging is completed. So once we've processed your file and brought it into our environment, a very special platform that we have that you won't see with other providers is that data goes to a field level encrypted database. It's very common. You'll see other smaller organizations blending operational and very sensitive PII into the same data store. That's just not the way we operate. Our operational data is strictly segregated from our PI into a highly secured cluster that has no external network access. It is not possible for an attacker to attack that data store directly. Every customer, upon onboarding, is issued an encryption key that's unique to them. So all of your data is encrypted with a key that is completely separated cryptographically from every other customer. That's something we take a lot of pride in. We lock down this PII data store so that only our internal processing engines can process this. And it's something we take a lot of pride in. So we're very excited to announce that so every customer can feel good knowing that their data is cryptographically isolated from any other customer. And finally, we've stored your data securely. We provided excellent matching. I loved the description John gave about what makes our matching process so unique. That's something that my engineers and I get really excited about. How can we constantly be improving this category? And so, as John said, we do use proprietary matching and scoring algorithms. You'll see that very commonly. We reach wide and far to make fuzzy matches that satisfy regulatory settlement agreements and the types of fuzziness that you'd expect a human to be able to identify. But then the human review and research allows us to make sure that we keep our accuracy rate well north of 99%. That 99+% accuracy rate is just not something you'll see with other organizations. If you are relying on an algorithmic-based approach, you are going to introduce false positives, which really diminishes the value of any offering. So I would invite you to compare our results with anyone else that you would see. As John said, like the Pepsi Coke challenge, we've never lost one of those. We would love to take that challenge and show you the value we can provide. And of course, after we've done the matching, our human team has gone through, our operations team has validated these results with a high degree of accuracy. It's time to get them back to you. And as I mentioned, our web portal provides 24/7 secure access. You've already onboarded with single sign-on, so you know that you've got your organization's multi-factor, IP restrictions, every other protection your organization would like to provide. Or we've delivered that file to you automatically with SFTP. Upon delivery with SFTP, you've already provided us with your PGP public key, which we've encrypted your file to, so that again, even in the event of a direct file access on that, there is no risk the file is encrypted to your public key, which only you can decrypt. So we take a lot of pride in the automated fashion that we can deliver these files to you. Makes it easier for this to operate like clockwork. You can take a vacation knowing that your data is going to get transferred to us, processed securely, and returned back to you without having to worry about that in a secure fashion. And in the event you need any other services, our web portal is available 24/7, undergoing annual penetration testing, that you can feel great about the convenience and the protection that we've allotted for you there.
So, and thanks, Dan, for that overview. We've talked about CertiDeath being the gold standard, and then Dan walked through the extensive data security that we have around our solution. In addition to having the best measurable outcome, we have what we think is the best data security. And so, the question is, okay, why Paragon then? At least 50% of people are concerned, or companies are concerned about sharing sensitive data. But that combined with the fact that most, if not all of you, have downstream customers. And so you have internal governance, you have, internal rules and regulations about sharing their data. It's going to be top of mind for everyone, right? And so that's what we took into consideration when we said, what are the barriers to really making a solution that customers can not only feel confident in having the best measurable outcome given the results that we produce, but can feel very comfortable with regard to data security and regardless as to whether or not things have been locked down on the vendor side, like our side, how can we make them feel comfortable that they aren't sharing things that they have to be concerned about? And that's where CertiDeath Paragon comes into play. And so for Paragon, I think there are three areas here that I want to touch on briefly. What is it? How do we do it? And who should get it? And how do you get it, right? And so briefly, to describe CertiDeath Paragon in the simplest terms, the intention of CertiDeath Paragon is to significantly reduce, if not completely eliminate, the risk associated with transmitting sensitive PII, in particular, a social security number, okay? Again, we intend to significantly reduce or eliminate the risk associated with transferring sensitive PII, in particular a social security number. What does that mean? That means for CertiDeath Paragon, we have developed processes and data sets over the past 5 years that enable us to identify social security numbers without getting the social security number from you. In order to do that, there are a few pieces of information that we need. Again, these are not considered sensitive pieces of personally identifiable information. So the pieces of information that we need in order to effectively execute CertiDeath Paragon are a unique identifier from the customer by person, right? So a unique identifier, a first name, a last name, a city, a state, and a partial date of birth. Partial date of birth, month and year, is not considered sensitive PII. Full date of birth is considered sensitive PII and requires consumer notification should it be ever stolen or breached in 2 states. But partial date of birth is not considered as a global rule. Now I know organizations have their own rules, but as a global rule, which is what we go by, it's not considered sensitive PII. So again, what we need for CertiDeath Paragon is a unique identifier by person, a first name, a last name, a city, a state, and a partial date of birth. What we're able to do with that information then is we're able to take that information into our system, access the data sets that we have, and identify social security numbers that align with that person. Okay, so that means that any requirements with regard to DMF or state data matches for regulatory settlement agreements, for example, we are making social security matches. Now, the way this process will work is you send us that information, we will go pull the social security numbers that we have, match them to the person. In our testing, which has been extensive, we are typically able to get to at least a 70% identification of social security numbers. Okay. The typical amount of matching that we make is 90% plus. What does that mean? It means that minimally, we've just eliminated 70% of the data security risk associated with the data that you send us. Okay. Typically, we're going to eliminate 90% right out of the gate. The way the process will work is you'll send us that, we'll pull the socials, and then we'll come back to you and say, listen, partner, we haven't been able to identify socials for 10% of the population. Here's the 10%. We need you to send us those socials. And what we'll do is we'll match those 1 for 1 in the data set that we have. We just couldn't make the match because of the data you sent us. There are unique situations that prevent us from doing that. We'll get the other 10%, and then we'll delete your data, right? What does this do? Essentially, it eliminates the risk of data transfer, number 1, but number 2, it eliminates the risk of consumer notification because now we've taken the data, we put it in our system. You didn't send us the data. Any data that you did send us for the stuff that we missed, we've taken out of our system, right? Again, we think that CertiDeath was evolutionary. This is revolutionary because we're going to be able to deliver the same results as gold standard CertiDeath, but now we've taken into effect data security and have significantly reduced or eliminated your company sending us social security numbers. So that's what Paragon is. You're going to send us certain data fields which are not considered sensitive PII. We, through our data sets and processes that we've developed over the last 5 years, are going to be able to go get the social security number for that person. Anything that we can't find, we're going to ask you for. You're going to send to us. We're going to we're going to match in our system. Then we're going to delete the data you gave us. Again, taking out transfer issues with regard to sensitive PII and then responsibility of client communication because now we have the data, right? And we found the data. You didn't give us the data. So that's Paragon. And what does that produce? The same results, potentially better results, given the data that we have, which we probably can make some data from companies better, and we can talk about that individually, so we can get even better on our matching, which is hard to do, but there's a little bit more room there that we can get better at, right? And we're always looking to do that, again, as a company dedicated to the space in a way nobody else is. So that's Paragon. How do we do it? The simple, and that's the biggest question we get when we've had these conversations with clients, and we've had several dozen of them. That's the foremost question, right? And again, We are the largest independent company dedicated to population management. We are continuous innovators. We've developed processes and data sets over the last 5 years as a result of CertiDeath that enable us to come up with this solution. And again, as we've talked about before with regard to CertiDeath, put us to the test. We're happy to show results, to show how, can we match socials? Can we get to death audit results without getting a social from you? Happy to talk about how we can prove that to you. But that's how we do it. Processes and data sets that have been developed for the last 5 years. Who should get it and how do you get it? Listen, if you're on CertiDeath right now, Dan went through our security protocols. Your data is locked down, right? Your data is locked down. You're getting the best results. And so the customers that should think about Paragon probably fall into 2 camps first. Everyone should think about it. But the first 2 camps I would suggest are, if you have a data set that you don't have or you don't feel like you have, and we can help identify this, by the way, accurate or complete social security numbers or dates of birth, you should be thinking about Paragon, because that's where Paragon comes in to help fill that stuff in, right? So that would be one group of people. If you don't have good data, right? If you don't have good data. The other group of people, obviously, is if you're not working with us right now or don't have CertiDeath, we should introduce you to CertiDeath Paragon as your first taste of working with the Berwyn Group, right? So those are really the 2 first groups. The third group is, if you do have CertiDeath and want to move over to Paragon, obviously we support that. And we will work with you to do that. Just want to let you know that your data is locked down. We have your PII right now. Your data is locked down, as Dan described it, in a way that it would be hard, if not impossible, to penetrate, given the way that we have things set up, right? And you're getting the best results. Okay, so those would be the groups and how I would say people should think about doing this. Now, as we move forward again, in summary, Berwyn is the largest independent group with only over 100 people dedicated to population management, including the solutions we're talking about today. You heard from our CIO. We have data technologists, we have engineers, we have data scientists, we have a sales team, we have a marketing team, we have executive leadership by vertical. Just a professionally run organization dedicated to the space in a way no one else is, focused on innovating, right? And that's where CertiDeath Paragon came from. CertiDeath is the gold standard, has been proven over and over. If you're not currently on it, we'd be happy to show you what we can do there. CertiDeath Paragon is revolutionary in that now, in addition to having gold standard measurable outcome results, we are eliminating or significantly reducing the data security risk associated with this category. Most people are thinking about it at some level, right? Because it is the biggest risk. What's going to happen to the social security numbers I'm sending to my other vendors? What Paragon allows you to do is it allows you now to consolidate vendors potentially, right? Because Paragon processes will be throughout our different solutions. CertiCensus, Death Audit, Locate, all those solutions. We will have Paragon processes and data sets throughout our solutions. You can consolidate vendors. You can eliminate a risk associated with working an outside vendor, right? And you can feel comfortable that your downstream customers are getting served in the best way possible through this niche category. Okay, so that's really the overview on CertiDeath Paragon. Again, Paragon very quickly takes the CertiDeath results, eliminates the data security risk in that you have to send us variables now that are considered non-sensitive PII and typically will exclude the social security number. We will do social security number matching on our end. Anything we can't find, we will come back to you for. You can send us. We will do the one-for-one match on our end and take away the social security number you sent us. Again, eliminating the full risk if we can go through that whole process. So if you're interested, we should start those discussions as soon as possible, because I'm sure there are going to be a number of questions, especially with the sizable organizations that we work with on the insurance side and the pension side. Okay. From a contracting standpoint, we'll only be offered through the Berwyn Group. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that was the reason for the preamble. We are putting our support behind the Berwyn Group as a brand, but the financials obviously solid. Data security, infrastructure, 100-person plus company, all the things that you would need. And Berwyn's been in business for a while. It's just morphed now from a small shop to a 100-plus person professionally run organization dedicated to to population management. Okay. So with that said, why don't I open it up for questions that we have, Jack, and that are coming in.
So John, this first question goes to you, and this popped up a lot, and I think you touched on this, but in summary, how is CertiDeath Paragon different than CertiDeath as it stands?
Yeah, so CertiDeath Paragon will provide, essentially the same results in terms of death audit, right? And it is the gold standard, the most number of results, never lost the Coke or Pepsi challenge. The way that it differs is that in order for us to get those results on CertiDeath, typically what we've asked for is sensitive PII. We've asked our customers to send us a social security number so that we can do social security number matches. Paragon eliminates the need for you to send us social security numbers either for the majority of your population or all of your population, right? And so again, CertiDeath required a social security number to be sent to us as part of the data set. CertiDeath Paragon only requires a unique identifier on your end, a first name, a last name, a city, a state, and a partial date of birth. We will take that. We will identify the social security number on our end. Any social security numbers that we cannot identify, we will ask you for. Then we'll do a one-for-one match in our data set and eliminate the socials you sent us. So that's the difference, is it eliminates the risk of PII transfer coming from the client, which is the biggest risk or issue associated with this category.
And Dan, this one's coming your way. What sources does CertiDeath leverage to generate the index that we look up?
Yeah, John alluded to this a bit, and so the answer for CertiDeath and CertiDeath Paragon is identical. We leverage all the same data sources. We curate and scrape our own proprietary data sets for obituaries and funeral homes and media sites covering more than 26,000 websites daily. We go out and we get the original obits. We scrape them daily, weekly thereafter to find updates because that's very common in that industry. In addition, we have the limited death master file from Social Security Administration and a number of different state and vital sources. That is the same answer, whether it's CertiDeath Paragon, all of our death audit, CertiDeath products support those same data sources.
Great. And John, you touched on this question in your last statement, but I guess the question here is additional data needed for Paragon's results versus CertiDeath? You outlined the name and all that, but is additional data needed?
No, no. The additional data that's needed, and we typically get this, by the way, is a unique identifier for a person. We ask that not be typically a policy number or something, but even if it is, the way that we store our data won't make it a significant issue. So with regard to any new data, no, it's unique identifier, first name, last name, city, state, partial date of birth, not full date of birth.
Great. And John, are state regs that note SSA DMF master file satisfied by this product?
Yeah, again, I think that was one of the early questions we got. We weren't clear in our communication. We are doing social security number matching. So we are finding social security numbers, attaching them to a person, and making matches for death audit purposes. So we are meeting any regulatory requirements, especially with regard to regulatory settlement agreements. So yes, we are doing social security matching. This is not simply obituary matching. This is, as Dan mentioned, all the data sources that we have. All we're doing is eliminating you having to send us a social security number.
Perfect. And Dan, what can you tell us about how we validate matches without the SSN?
Yeah, so John mentioned the history of the CertiDeath product. We've been doing this for a long time. Our operations team, hands-on, human element expertise, they see these trends and what's really necessary to make a match. And we've all tried to implement our own version of an automated solution. You've tried to do an Excel VLOOKUP. You've tried to do a few automated things. We have much more sophisticated solutions and have seen millions and millions of these things come across our desk. So our team knows exactly what's necessary. So we've been able to go through and validate which data elements, how fuzzy is fuzzy to be acceptable, to keep our threshold for acceptance really high, but still keep that wide range so we can make up for the data discrepancies that are likely in your data set. No matter how hard you've tried to curate the best data set of your population, there will be incomplete data, dates of birth are wrong, that kind of thing. We see that all day, every day. It's what we live and do. So our team has been able to take that expertise and turn it into a very viable product. It's able to deliver the same level of quality as CertiDeath, without requiring sensitive elements like social security number.
Great. And a follow-up question to that, what steps is the Berwyn Group putting into place to assure that SSNs are secure? You talked about it a lot, but in summary, what are the big items?
Yeah, I would say I went through a long, deep dive on our security practices. The levels of encryption, defense in depth means the name of what we do. And everything I said about CertiDeath and our security practice, it's the identical process for Paragon. It's just you're not sending us the social security number, or if you are, it's on a fraction of your population. So everything I mentioned about our security policies, you can take to the bank for how we're handling for Paragon. And in the event we have to go back for a certain portion of your population, we're able to clean up those elements so that we're not retaining it any longer than we have to. Our data retention policies are very clear about how long we'll hang on to data, and we'd be happy to go through that with you and discuss that with CertiDeath, in addition to CertiDeath Paragon. But you can take all the security practices I just mentioned, customer-specific encryption, zero network access for our sensitive data sets. These are things that apply to all of our CertiDeath products. I would be happy to go into detail with your compliance team for further detail.
Please feel free to reach out to anyone on our sales or customer success team to get the conversation started. And feel free to send in any additional questions that you might have of us, or any ways that you think we could continue to improve in this category. But thank you all for your time, and really appreciate your interest.
Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.